Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company taking a look at some of the guns that they're going to be selling in their upcoming September of 2018 premiere auction. Today, specifically, we have a Colt Camp Perry model, and it kind of looks like a revolver, but it's actually not a revolver. This is a gun that was designed specifically for national match style competition target shooting, and that's why they gave it the name Camp Perry. If you're not familiar, Camp Perry, Ohio is the range complex where the U.S. national matches are held and have been held for a very long time. So it's the equivalent of, Colt naming the Bisley model much earlier on with the single action armies. Camp Perry, for people who shoot competition, is a name that will definitely convey the idea that this is supposed to be a target pistol. Now, Colt made a couple of other target guns at the same time, most notably the Colt Officer's model, which was a 6-shot revolver chambered for, among other things, .22 long rifle for target shooting. Well, if you wanted a gun that was a little more accurate than a Colt Officer's model, but you really liked the handling of a revolver like that, and this would theoretically apply to a lot of people in this time period, that is what the Colt Camp Perry model was for. These were introduced in 1926, and they were manufactured and sold right up until the U.S. entered World War II in 1941. At that point, Colt, of course, had pressing military contracts that it had to be working on, and manufacture of things like single-shot target pistols was a little less important. So let's go ahead and take a closer look. Let me show you why this isn't a revolver, although it kind of looks like one. Now, Colt actually spent some time developing this pistol, as we can tell from this specific example, which has some really cool history to it. This is actually one of the pre-production examples. The first 63 were made by Colt and provided to basically U.S. target shooters and Olympians to basically give them feedback on how they thought the gun was, any changes that they thought ought to be made, and that sort of thing. And so this gun is serial number 35, right in the middle of that pre-production series. And I happen to have here a copy of the factory letter from Colt about this pistol, where it mentions that this was originally shipped in 1920 to D.G. Phelps, who was the sales manager for Colt at the time. Well, these pistols didn't actually go into production until 1926. This particular one, as the Colt records indicate, actually came back to Colt very early in 1927. So basically, once they were done using it for testing, it was returned to the company, and then they actually resold it in 1929. So this is a particularly cool example in that it is one of the very first ones that then went on to be resold. Colt didn't have any reason to keep those pre-production guns around just for the sake of them having small serial numbers. Anyway, the other markings we will see on here are a Colt patent marking on the top of the barrel. The patent date on there is 1905. That has to do with the lockwork, I believe. On the side of the barrel, we have the chambering, .22 long rifle. And then the most substantial marking is, of course, Camp Perry model, here on the side of what appears to be a flattened cylinder. So there are some other .22 revolver target conversion sort of arrangements out there that look pretty much like this, where they've flattened the cylinder down so it only has either one or maybe two chambers in it, usually one, and you pop the quote-unquote cylinder out, and you always use the same chamber, and that gives you a certain additional amount of consistency to your shooting. Well, what Colt did here is not quite the same. They fluted this flat block so that it looks like a revolver cylinder. Note that they got half flutes on the top and bottom, just like you would expect on a proper revolver. However, when we open this up, you'll see that the barrel is actually physically connected to this thing. While it looks like a revolver cylinder, this is actually a monolithic single-shot pistol and barrel. So there is no cylinder gap, and that was the main advantage that this gun had over the Colt Officer's model, which was their revolver, their target revolver offering at the time. No cylinder gap means improved accuracy. Not a huge amount, but just that little bit that makes a difference to some people. It does operate the exact same way as a standard Colt revolver, though, with this cylinder latch, although there isn't a cylinder. Now the grip is identical. The frame here is identical to the Colt Officer's model, so handling was the same. They checkered the back strap to give you a little bit more purchase on it. They also checkered the trigger face there, and that's an interesting modification that people kind of go back and forth on through different periods of time and different schools of thought. Some people think that you want a checkered trigger or a serrated trigger to improve grip. Some people think you want a smooth trigger so that, well, your trigger finger doesn't, you reduce friction on the trigger. Both schools of thought peak and wane from time to time. When Colt did this, a checkered trigger was a cool thing to have. The sights are fully adjustable. There's a rear notch here. Notice that this is angle cut at the sight, and that's to maximize the amount of light that comes in, transmitted through the rear sight. We have a number of stadia here, so you can keep track of exactly where you are. That screw right there is a lock screw, and then this screw actually slides the sight left and right. So loosen the lock screw, and then you can use this to adjust the rear sight for exact windage with whatever load you're shooting. The front sight is what's called a Partridge front sight, and this front sight actually pivots up and down. So you can loosen that little tiny screw and then adjust the elevation on the front sight and then lock it back down. So windage and elevation adjustable on this target revolver, as you would certainly want on a target revolver. One other neat thing they did here was they actually replaced the mainspring, where most Colt revolvers, including the officer's model at the time, had a flat mainspring. They gave the Camp Perry model a coil mainspring, and that actually reduced the lock time slightly. So again, lock time, especially on a hammer-fired revolver with a target gun, is a real thing. Reducing lock time improves your potential for accuracy, because there's that much less time between when the trigger releases and when the gun actually fires. That said, how many people can actually take advantage of that potential improvement? Well, only the really top-tier shooters. As far as handling goes, it's excellent. The trigger pull is very nice and crisp and light. The grip feel is really good. The balance is really good. The sights are excellent. Really, this is a fantastic target pistol, and it did, in fact, win a number of Camp Perry championships in the hands of some really good shooters. So this is the early pattern of the gun. Obviously, it's actually a pre-production gun, but as such, it has a 10-inch barrel on it. That was the original configuration, and in 1933, they made some changes to the design, and not huge ones, but they reduced the barrel length to 8 inches, so a little bit shorter. And they also made a little bit of a change to the firing mechanism, where on this early gun, the hammer comes all the way back to here, like you would expect for a typical revolver. In 33, they adjusted the lockwork so that the hammer actually didn't travel as far backwards. You didn't need a tremendous amount of drop to set off a .22 cartridge, and with a shorter hammer throw, they could actually improve lock time, reduce lock time, even more. So after 33, those changes were implemented. And of course, you'll notice the trigger is all the way forward here. It looks like a double action gun. It is not. This one isn't. They did make a small number that did have double action lock work, although a significant majority, like this one, are single action only. Single action is obviously the predominant way you would be shooting this in slow fire competition. And I should point out, the type of competition this was intended for was, in fact, slow fire. So you had many minutes per round to fire, and there was no need to, if you could get any additional accuracy from a single shot gun, well, not having a repeating firearm, not having a cylinder of 6 shots was no disadvantage in this type of competition. I should also point out that the ejector rod remains an ejector rod, just only ejects the one cartridge. Ultimately, only about 2,500 Camp Perry models were actually sold in the 15 years that they were available. And that's a pretty small production. That's pretty much not a very successful pistol from a commercial point of view. And the reason was simply that the improvement in accuracy wasn't substantial enough, especially for most shooters who probably couldn't actually take advantage of it. It wasn't good enough to dissuade them from getting a gun like a Colt officer's model, which was a 6-shot proper revolver, or something like a Colt Woodsman, a semi-auto .22 competition and target pistol. So the market for something like this specifically, it just wasn't very big. And so after World War II, of course, Colt didn't reintroduce this pistol. There just wasn't enough commercial justification to do it. That said, none of that means it's a bad pistol. In fact, it's a really good pistol. It's, for what it's designed for, it's maybe too good, and that's what led to its commercial, less than successful record. It was too specialized of a target pistol. So, not a whole lot of them made. This is a particularly nice looking one, at least to my eye. If you're interested in this sort of thing, well, take a look at the Rock Island Auction House. They have this and many more things like it coming up for sale in September of 2018. Thanks for watching.